Hi and welcome to Travel with Carl, and this is my flight review of my flight from Brisbane to Longreach. Now, normally there'd be some sort of introduction to these videos, but given I fly by the model of why fly direct when you can connect, there is no intro on this flight. That's because my flying by Connect almost made me miss this flight. I'd flown from Melbourne to Newcastle to Brisbane to then Barcaldine and Longreach, but my flight from Newcastle to Brisbane was running late. So by the time I landed at Brisbane Airport, my flight to Longreach had already started boarding. I made a quick dash across the terminal, missed the main boarding call, was driven in a private chauffeur car to the gate and was the last person to board my flight. Therefore, I've got no video of the bit in between, so we're just starting pretty much as we push back from the gate. I hope you enjoy the rest of the view and look forward to seeing you on the channel. Once my bag was on board, we were good to go, and we taxied out to the new runway in Brisbane. It was my first time to use this new runway, which opened in the midst of the pandemic on 12th of July 2020. Hopefully it'll speed up the arrivals and departures in Brisbane that were often limited by the single runway. We took off on runway 19 right and made a right-hand turn away from the coast over the suburbs of Brisbane. The first hour or so of the flight had patchy clouds beneath us as we cruised along at 24,000 feet. As we got further inland, the green tinge of the coastline gave way to the red dirt of central and then western Queensland. I've flown over this part of the world before on trips to Asia, but flying 10 to 15,000 feet lower makes a huge difference as to what you can see as you fly by. The landscape is uniquely Australian. The vastness is something you have to see to appreciate. The only major waypoints along the route are dry river and creek beds that scar the landscape like a claw running across hardened dirt. Towns are few and far between. At check-in, I was allocated an exit row. Score. This had me seated in the first row on the right-hand side of the aircraft. My seat today was 2D. The seat is situated next to the forward emergency exit, diagonally opposite the main entry. Due to the emergency exit, all bags etc. need to be stowed before takeoff. The overhead lockers aren't huge, so you won't fit a roll-on in. Despite being the last to board, however, my backpack still fit in. The perks of this prized exit row seat are the extra legroom that it offers at knee level. However, as there's no seat in front of you, you lose the ability to slide your feet under the seat in front. This means some might find that they have a constantly bent knee. That said, I'm an average height, so I fit pretty easily into most seats. There is one downside to this seat, especially from an advocate perspective. Unfortunately, if you love looking out the window is quite a long way forward from the seat, making it difficult to stare out the window all day. Talk about first world problem. I had a bit of a cramp in my neck from leaning forward and gazing out the window for most of the journey. By the time I got to Longreach, I had one hell of a headache. I also noticed that the engine noise is quite a bit louder up here than a flight I took later on where I sat down the back, but that's pretty subjective and maybe not noticeably different. Now let's talk about the seat itself. It's quite narrow and there's not a great deal of elbow room, so I found that my elbow got quite friendly with the gentleman sitting next to me. This is partially due to the table being stowed in the seat arm and partially due to the narrow seat itself. We are on a narrow body prop plane. It's only 2-2 across, there's not much room to work with. The seat itself is covered in leather and looks quite aged and not as clean as I'd like it to be given that we are in the middle of a pandemic. There's also a hard shell seat pocket in the bulkhead in front for the safety card and any small items. I like to carry a water bottle with me, and the hard nature of this pocket makes it tricky to fit much inside without squeezing it and squashing it to death. I sound like I'm complaining about the exit row, which I guess I am, but having spent years always trying to score these seats, sometimes it's good to point out that it's not as perfect as it's made out to be just because you've got more legroom. Let's talk about the in-flight service. Very shortly after takeoff, the crew came through the cabin offering a light snack, tea, coffee and soft drinks. The snack was a Spring Hill Farm twin pack of chocolate oat bar and a lemon and yogurt bar. They're combined together and it tastes pretty good. I opted for a can of Coke, needing a bit more caffeine hit after the early morning start. As this is the longest flight I'm taking today, it was a bit odd that it was the smallest meal served. I had planned to eat in a lounge before the flight. Due to that very short connection, I barely had enough time to make the flight, let alone eat. As a result, it meant I skipped any substantial lunch today. So I would have thought that a small sandwich would have been a better meal for this type of day and this type of flight duration, but the snack provided was sweet and tasty. Maybe I'm just hungry. Unlike Rex, who seemed to be able to do a snack service on even the shorter sectors, there was no second snack service on the flight from Barcaldine to Longreach. Given the flight was full and the sector only 20 minutes, I can see why they didn't have time to get around to everyone. Overall, the snack was okay. As with most regional flying in Australia, I was flying via Barcaldine on a Bombardier Dash-8 400. More commonly known as the Dash-8, Qantas fly three versions of the Dash-8 series aircraft. There's the 200, 300 and 400 series, all sporting the flying kangaroo tail. There is also an operator of the 100 series in far north Queensland who I'm keen to try to complete the set one day. However, today I'm flying on the 400 series, which is the largest in the fleet. It's got 74 seats in an all-economy 2-2 configuration across 19 rows. There's 31 of these aircraft in the Qantas fleet, all flying under the QantasLink brand, but each are operated by a different subsidiary airline, all within the Qantas family. This flight is flown by Sunstate Airlines. The aircraft rego is VHQOV and is named after Ballarat in Victoria, even though we're in Queensland. It was delivered direct to Sunstate Airlines in December 2009, making it 11.5 years old. While it's 11.5 years old, it's looking pretty good for its age, although it could probably use a deep clean and maybe a few scratches buffed out. The flight to Longreach is supported by the Queensland Government and is used to connect the smaller communities of Barcaldine and Blackall. Each town has a population of about 1,400 people, and the flights alternate which day they stop at which stop. Today's flight went via Barcaldine, and despite our delay out of Brisbane, we landed 5 minutes ahead of schedule. About 10 people got off while the rest remained on board as we collected our new passengers. It seemed like everyone on the plane, and I'm not really exaggerating, wanted to use the bathroom on the short stopover. However, the crew did strictly enforce the rule of one passenger queuing for the bathroom at any one time. It's good to see some COVID-safe protocols at play. The plane was filled up for a remaining segment, with every seat filled, with a lot of new passengers joining the flight. There seemed to be an issue with one passenger who had booked all the way through to Longreach but wanted to get off at Barcaldine instead. After what looked like some long discussions on the ground in both Brisbane and Barcaldine, the lady reboarded the plane and ended up continuing on to Longreach. Apparently she had to drive back to Barcaldine. Of those that board in Barcaldine, most will be travelling on to Brisbane as this service flies a triangle route, with the return trip running non-stop from Longreach to Brisbane. Once everyone was on board, we taxied out onto the runway in Barcaldine ready for takeoff. We took off to the south and made a small turn to the right. The small township was visible from the right-hand side of the plane. After a slight turn, we then headed straight towards Longreach. It's 107 kilometres by road from Barcaldine to Longreach Airport, which the Dash-8 managed to do in 20 minutes compared to the hour and 10 by road. While there wasn't a huge difference in the landscape below, the vastness of the outback really began to sink in, with the large swathes of land and very little signs of life to be seen. What was I getting myself into? It's quite the contrast to a short flight in Europe, where there's green fields with villages and towns as far as the eye can see. Out here, it's 50 shades of brown. There's the occasional road forming long straight lines across the land, and I mean occasional. The seatbelt sign remained on for the duration of this very short flight. It now makes sense the long queue for the bathroom at our Barcaldine stopover and the lack of in-flight services, and there's a very short last hop to Longreach. We entered the circuit at Longreach and then landed on runway 22, which for the aviation geeks is 1,936 metres long, or at least that's what Wikipedia told me. This is more than enough runway for a Dash-8. A 747 and a 707 have landed here before. We touched down, then used most of the runway rolling along to the end. Once off the runway, it's a very short taxi to the terminal. The main point of view as we taxied to the terminal was the Qantas Founders Museum. The Founders Museum is the highlight of Longreach, and the star attraction of the museum is the Qantas 747 and 707, which stand much taller than the terminal building I've just arrived at. After the engines shut down, it's a short walk into the fairly modern-looking terminal, with Longreach Airport inscribed in bright orange letters on the terminal wall, "Welcome travellers to Longreach." Once inside, there's a small baggage carousel and rental car desks in the arrivals area. As is a small airport, there's no security screening, meaning the terminal is pretty open plan. The centre of the terminal has a waiting room with a large window looking out onto the apron, and the opposite end of the building is home to a few check-in counters for the two airlines that service Longreach, being Qantas and Rex. While waiting for my luggage to arrive, I got the impression that for many travellers on this flight it was simply a commute to work, with high-vis clothing a prominent feature. There was also quite a few business travellers, potentially due to the Queensland government holding a regional cabinet session during my visit. And then there was me, a solo traveller, excited to be starting my adventure tracing to the foundation of Qantas. Hope you've enjoyed this in-flight review and look forward to seeing you on the channel. Hit the subscribe button. Cheers.